The lights dim, the crowd roars, and a figure draped in gold steps into the ring. Not just a boxer, but a showman who redefined the sport. Prince Naseem Hamed wasn't only known for his knockout power and acrobatic entrances. Outside the ropes, his life was a spectacle of wealth, luxury, and jaw-dropping possessions. From a Sheffield mansion fit for royalty, to a garage lined with million-dollar cars, to jewelry that sparkled under fight night spotlights, Naseem built an empire as flamboyant as his style. But behind the glitter, there are stories rarely told, secret investments, controversial moments, and one asset so unexpected, it challenges everything we thought we knew about the prince. Today, we step beyond the ring to explore the homes, cars, collections, and hidden fortunes of a man whose legacy is measured not just in titles, but in treasures. Before the gold chains, the Rolls-Royces, and the multi-million-pound properties, Prince Naseem Hamed was just a wiry kid from Sheffield with something most fighters never truly master: presence. Born to Yemeni parents in 1974, Naseem grew up in a working-class neighborhood, far removed from the glitz that would later define his image. His early days in the gym weren't about money. They were about proving he could be more than just quick hands and a flashy smile. And yet, even as a teenager, the signs were there. The showmanship, the confidence, the swagger that hinted he wasn't content with simply winning. By the early 90s, he was tearing through opponents with an unorthodox style that broke every textbook boxing rule, but somehow made perfect sense when he did it. He wasn't just beating fighters, he was embarrassing them, taunting them mid-round, grinning at the crowd, playing to the cameras. And as the belts started piling up, WBO, IBF, WBC, so did the purses. By 1997, Naseem was one of the highest-paid athletes in Britain, commanding million-pound paydays for a single night's work. It was here that the seeds of his later empire were planted. Big fights meant big checks, and big checks meant the ability to live not just comfortably, but extravagantly. But the prince didn't just spend, he announced his wealth. He arrived to bouts in designer suits, glittering jewelry, and occasionally even on a flying carpet prop, making sure the cameras never missed a second. He wasn't just building a career, he was building a persona, one that would spill over into every aspect of his life, including the assets we're about to explore. But the first real glimpse into the scale of his fortune wouldn't come in the ring. It would come in bricks, gates, and manicured lawns. In the late 1990s, when most boxers were still thinking about flashy cars or a bigger flat, Naseem went for something more permanent: a sprawling mansion in Sheffield. Purchased for a reported multi-million-pound sum, the property wasn't just a home, it was a statement. Sitting behind high-security gates, the mansion boasted sprawling grounds, custom interiors, and the kind of opulent detailing that matched the persona fans saw under the arena lights. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed fixtures, every corner whispered luxury. But the Sheffield estate was only the start. Over time, the prince quietly added more properties to his name, each one carefully chosen. While details on all his holdings remain private, it's rumored he invested in properties abroad, vacation homes in sun-soaked locations where he could disappear from the public eye. His approach was simple: combine the thrill of high-profile purchases with the stability of long-term investments. And yet, for all the grandeur of his primary residence, there was one property acquisition that caught insiders off guard. A discreet investment far from the media's glare. Few people even knew it existed, and its purpose wasn't just personal luxury. That particular move hinted that Naseem was thinking beyond the next fight, beyond the next headline. But if his properties showed the prince could think like a mogul, his garage proved he could still spend like a superstar. Step inside Naseem's collection of vehicles, and you'll understand something instantly. This wasn't a man who blended in on the road. Rolls-Royces in gleaming white, Ferraris in racing red, Lamborghinis with custom detailing. Each car felt like an extension of his ring entrances. Bold, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. The centerpiece? A Rolls-Royce Phantom, valued well into six figures, complete with bespoke interior work that matched his taste for the extravagant. But it wasn't all about brand names. Naseem's garage also reflected his flair for the rare and unique. Limited production supercars that most drivers would never even see in person sat alongside high-performance sports models tuned for speed. Each came with a story, a victory celebration, a just because purchase, or, in one case, a gift to himself after a particularly grueling training camp. One vehicle in particular stands out, not for its price tag, but for its history. While it's never been publicly confirmed, insiders claim that one of the cars in his possession had once belonged to a major celebrity outside the boxing world, making it as much a piece of pop culture memorabilia as a mode of transport. Whether it's tucked away in a private garage or still hitting the roads on rare occasions, that car represents exactly what made Naseem's taste unique. It wasn't just about spending, it was about owning stories. And if the vehicles proved the prince's love for speed and spectacle, his jewelry and personal luxuries would take that image to another level entirely. If the cars were his way of making an entrance on the streets, the jewelry was how Prince Naseem Hamed lit up every room he walked into. From the earliest days of his career, the prince understood the power of visual dominance, the way a single sparkling chain could draw eyes, the way a gold-encrusted watch could signal success before a single word was spoken. And he didn't just dabble in luxury pieces, he built a collection that could rival that of a seasoned jeweler. One of his signature looks was the thick, diamond-set chain, often paired with pendants custom-made to reflect his personality. Bold, oversized, and designed to catch the spotlight. Rings adorned with clusters of diamonds were worn not for subtlety, but as statements. He wasn't afraid to go bigger, brighter, and more elaborate than anyone else in the room. Each piece was carefully chosen, not just for its material value, but for the image it projected. A champion who could back up every ounce of his flash with hard-earned victories. And then there were the watches. Rolex was a given, from the iconic day-date President model to rare Daytonas, each customized to his taste. But his collection didn't stop there. Audemar's Piguet Royal Oaks, Patek Philippe Nautiluses, and even diamond-encrusted Frank Muller pieces have been linked to his name. These weren't just timepieces, they were wearable trophies, each one representing a chapter in his journey from the Sheffield gyms to the global boxing stage. What made the jewelry so integral to Naseem's brand was the way it blurred the lines between personal expression and professional image. On fight nights, the camera didn't just focus on his gloves, it caught the glint of diamond earrings as he danced under the lights, the flash of a bracelet as he raised his arms in victory. Outside the ring, these same pieces became part of his everyday armor, a reminder to the world, and perhaps to himself, that he had earned every carat. But there's also a lesser-known side to his luxury habit. Some pieces in his collection were commissioned from private jewelers, making them one-of-a-kind and virtually impossible to value. Others were reportedly purchased on international trips, in places where paparazzi couldn't follow, and where a deal could be made quietly. Whether displayed proudly or kept behind the velvet-lined walls of a safe, these treasures spoke volumes about a man who refused to do anything halfway. And yet, for all the sparkle, there's a twist in his spending habits. Jewelry was never his most extravagant indulgence. That title belongs to a different arena of his wealth entirely, one that combined high stakes, long-term vision, and the kind of risk only someone with his confidence would take. Because while the prince loved wearing his wealth, he also knew how to invest it. And those investments tell a side of his story that's just as fascinating as the knockout reels. For a man known for spending big, Prince Naseem Hamed was never just a consumer. He was also a strategist. Beneath the glimmer of diamonds and the roar of sports cars was a businessman quietly building foundations that would outlast his boxing career. While the cameras captured the entrances and celebrations, behind closed doors he was making moves that spoke to a deeper understanding of money, that true wealth is sustained, not just spent. One of Naseem's earliest plays outside the ring was property. His Sheffield mansion might have been the crown jewel, but reports suggest he expanded his holdings into rental properties and commercial real estate. This wasn't about flipping for quick profit. These were long-term plays, chosen in areas where value was expected to rise steadily. Friends close to him have hinted that he kept a small but steady income stream from tenants and leases, a far cry from the high-adrenaline world of prize fights, but a smart buffer against the unpredictable nature of sports careers. Then there were his business ventures. Though much of his portfolio remains private, he has been linked to investments in gyms and training facilities. Not surprising given his roots. Supporting up-and-coming fighters wasn't just philanthropy, it was a way of maintaining influence in the sport, while potentially benefiting from the success of the next generation. Naseem's name carried weight, and attaching it to a project could instantly boost credibility and visibility. Endorsements, too, played their role. At his peak, brands were lining up to be associated with the Prince Prince's flair and confidence. Sportswear deals, equipment sponsorships, and appearances all added layers to his income, further solidifying his status as not just a fighter, but a marketable personality. Even after retirement, the occasional public appearance or collaboration hinted that his commercial instincts were still active. And then there are the whispers, investments in less traditional arenas. Some say he dipped into high-end collectibles, rare art, vintage sports memorabilia, perhaps even classic cars beyond his well-known collection. These are the kinds of assets that don't always appear on public balance sheets, but can quietly grow in value over time. What makes this side of Naseem's story compelling is that it runs counter to the stereotype of the flashy athlete who burns through fortune. While he embraced a lifestyle of visible luxury, he also showed signs of calculated thinking. The prince understood that public image could be leveraged into long-term opportunity, that while the boxing career had a ticking clock, business could go on indefinitely. Still, these investments tell only part of the story, because beyond the measured portfolio and strategic plays, there was another side of his lifestyle, one less about balance sheets and more about living without limits. And it's in this private, extravagant world that some of his most surprising choices were made. The next chapter takes us far from contracts and property deeds into the realm of pure indulgence, where cost is secondary to the experience itself. Step away from the cameras and the press conferences, and Prince Naseem Hamed's life takes on a different kind of spectacle, one that's more private, but no less extravagant. While much of his career was built in the public eye, those who know him say his real indulgences often happened far from the flashing bulbs of paparazzi lenses. Here, in his own curated world, the prince could enjoy his fortune without the noise, yet still in a way that left no doubt about the scale of his success. Travel was a cornerstone of this lifestyle. Private jets weren't just an occasional treat, they were part of his routine. First-class commercial flights might have been luxurious enough for most, but for Naseem, exclusivity mattered. Whether flying to the Middle East for family visits, heading to the Mediterranean for sun-soaked escapes, or making discreet trips to luxury shopping destinations in Europe, he moved in a way that ensured both privacy and comfort. And it wasn't just the flights, it was the destinations. Five-star resorts, villas with private chefs, and hidden retreats where only a select few could gain entry. His taste in entertainment matched his travel style. Exclusive, high-end restaurants where menus had no prices, private gatherings with other elite athletes, celebrities, and business figures. On some occasions, entire venues were booked out for an evening simply so the prince and his guests could enjoy themselves without interruption. Stories circulate of spontaneous nights where tens of thousands were spent in hours, not for show, but because he could. Shopping trips often became events in themselves. Luxury boutiques in London's Mayfair district, watch dealerships in Geneva, bespoke tailors in Milan. Naseem moved with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he wanted and didn't hesitate to pay for it. It wasn't just about owning expensive items, it was about choosing pieces that reinforced his personal brand, bold, confident, and utterly unique. Yet for all the material luxury, there's a side to this lifestyle that speaks to his cultural roots and personal values. Those close to him note that some of his most lavish gatherings were family-oriented, built around hospitality and generosity. In Middle Eastern tradition, hosting and taking care of guests is an art form, and Naseem brought that sensibility into his world of wealth, whether it meant laying out elaborate feasts, arranging entertainment, or simply ensuring everyone was treated to the best of everything. But among these indulgences, one story stands out: a purchase made on a trip abroad that was so unusual. Even those in his inner circle were caught off guard. It wasn't a car, a watch, or even a piece of jewelry. It was something entirely different, and it would become one of the most unexpected symbols of his wealth. And that brings us to the twist in his empire, the asset that breaks all expectations and reveals a side of the prince most people have never seen. For all the glitz, glamour, and calculated investments, Prince Naseem Hamed's story also has a chapter that shook his public image, and, for a time, cast a shadow over the empire he had built. In 2005, long after his peak boxing years, Naseem made headlines not for a fight, but for an incident that played out far from the ring. A high-speed collision in his Mercedes McLaren left another driver seriously injured, leading to legal consequences that would follow him for years. The fallout was swift and intense. Media outlets that once celebrated his flamboyance now dissected his his choices with sharp criticism. The narrative shifted from boxing's golden showman to controversial figure, and sponsors distanced themselves. For a man whose brand was built on public adoration, this was a dangerous turn. The lavish lifestyle, once seen as part of his charm, was now being reframed as recklessness. Financially, the event was significant. Legal costs mounted, insurance claims followed, and the absence of active endorsements meant one of his revenue streams temporarily dried up. While Nasim's wealth was substantial enough to absorb the blow, the incident served as a stark reminder of how quickly fortune, both financial and reputational, could change. For someone used to controlling the narrative, it was one of the few times his public image was dictated by forces outside his control. And yet, this was also a moment that revealed another layer to his character. Behind the headlines, Nasim reportedly took steps to rebuild, refocus, and ensure his private life became less susceptible to public scandal. Friends close to him speak of a shift: less time in the spotlight, more emphasis on family, and a quiet but deliberate effort to protect his assets and legacy from further damage. In some ways, the controversy humanized him. Fans who had once seen him as untouchable were reminded he was still a man capable of mistakes and misjudgments. For others, it was a turning point that marked the end of the larger-than-life prince they remembered from the 1990s. But if critics expected him to fade into quiet obscurity, they underestimated the man's instinct for reinvention. Nasim had one more surprise up his sleeve, not in the form of a comeback fight, but in the shape of an asset that defied all the typical expectations of a retired athlete. And when the details of this twist asset surfaced, it became clear that the prince's empire wasn't just about luxury, it was about unpredictability. When most people imagine the wealth of a retired boxing champion, they picture the usual suspects: sprawling mansions, exotic cars, diamond-studded watches. And yes, Prince Naseem Hamed had all of those in abundance. But buried among the obvious markers of luxury sits a piece of his empire that feels completely out of left field, an asset so unusual that even those close to him were caught off guard when they learned about it. According to those who know him, the prince has a fascination with ownership that goes beyond physical possessions. He's drawn to things that tell a story, items or holdings that reflect power, exclusivity, and sometimes mystery. And this particular acquisition fits all three. It wasn't a property in London or Dubai, nor was it a rare sports car or a trophy piece of jewelry. Instead, it was something tied to heritage, identity, and legacy. Rumors swirl about the specifics. Some say it's a historic property in Yemen, his ancestral homeland, preserved for its cultural significance rather than its market value. Others claim it's a rare, one-of-a-kind collectible, something that sits quietly in a vault, accruing not just monetary worth, but symbolic weight. Whatever the truth, this asset isn't about public display. It's not meant to be flaunted in interviews or parked outside a luxury hotel. It's something deeper, more personal, and potentially far more valuable in the long run than any supercar or diamond chain. What makes it truly fascinating is how it contrasts with the rest of his portfolio. For a man whose public life was defined by spectacle, this is an acquisition that thrives in silence. It's the kind of move that suggests a shift in priorities, from outward display to inward meaning, and yet the secrecy surrounding it only adds to the intrigue. Fans speculate, journalists dig, but details remain scarce, adding a layer of myth to the legend of the prince. Whether this twist asset was a calculated investment, an emotional decision, or a mix of both, it reinforces one truth: Naseem Hamed has never been predictable. Just as his fighting style baffled opponents in the ring, his financial moves keep observers guessing. It's this unpredictability that continues to make him a subject of fascination long after his last professional bout. And while the exact nature of this mysterious holding may never be fully revealed to the public, its existence proves that the prince's empire is more complex than the flash we've seen. His story isn't just about material excess, it's about choices, some loud, some quiet, that together create a legacy as layered as the man himself. And as we step into the final part of this journey, we'll see how all these chapters, the rise, the riches, the controversy, and the mystery, combine to define the true legacy of Prince Naseem Hamed. 2 decades after his final professional fight, the name Prince Naseem Hamed still sparks recognition, not just in boxing circles, but in the wider conversation about sports icons who transcended their craft. For many, his legacy is captured in highlight reels, the wild angles, the sudden knockouts, the audacious taunts. But there's another legacy, less visible yet equally enduring: the empire he built, the way he lived, and the statement statement his wealth continues to make. Naseem's fortune isn't measured purely in net worth figures, though, by most estimates, he remains comfortably in the multi-million. It's measured in the deliberate choices he made with that wealth: the Sheffield mansion that symbolized his arrival as a champion, the supercars that turned heads wherever he went, the jewelry that glittered under the ring lights, the investments that proved he could think like a mogul, and of course, the twist asset quietly tucked away, holding a value far beyond money. His approach to wealth reflected the man himself: bold, unapologetic, but never entirely predictable. In an era when many athletes saw their fortunes vanish within years of retirement, Naseem demonstrated the importance of diversification, even if his version of it was wrapped in Rolls-Royce leather and set with diamonds. He understood that wealth could be a performance in itself, a continuation of the showmanship that defined his fights. But he also recognized the need for stability, for assets that could weather the storms of public perception and time. Perhaps most importantly, his wealth is inseparable from his cultural and personal identity. The extravagance wasn't just indulgence, it was expression. A kid from Sheffield, the son of Yemeni immigrants, rising to a position where he could own what he wanted, go where he wanted, and live on his own terms. Every high-profile purchase, every quiet investment, every rumored acquisition tells a part of that story. And yet, his legacy of wealth isn't only about accumulation. It's also about preservation, of his reputation in certain circles, of his standing within the sport, and of his influence as a symbol of confidence and success. The same way he changed the rhythm of a boxing match, he disrupted expectations for what a British boxing champion could be outside the ring. Today, when discussions about athlete wealth turn to flash and risk, Naseem's name still surfaces, often as a reminder that showmanship and strategy can, in rare cases, coexist. His empire isn't perfect, and his path wasn't without missteps, but the total picture is one of resilience, reinvention, and a refusal to fade into irrelevance. And as we close this journey through his mansions, cars, treasures, and secrets, one truth stands out. Prince Naseem Hamed didn't just fight to win in the ring, he fought to live like a champion every day thereafter.